Back in Santa Monica, the young man who had knocked on the door, Leo, was quickly becoming a fixture in apartment 201. He was a student of architecture, a coincidence that Jack found both suspicious and poetic. "So, Leo," Jack said one morning, watching the boy struggle with a vintage percolator. "Why here? Why this building? There are plenty of modern condos with actual elevators and floors that don't lean." Leo looked up, his eyes bright with a familiar kind of desperation. "Mr. Tripper, I've spent my whole life studying glass boxes, but this building, it has a soul ratio that defies the standard formulas. I read about the architecture of a lie, and I realized that I didn't want to build houses. I wanted to build sanctuaries." Jack felt a tug at his heart. He saw himself in Leo, not the chef, but the man who was just looking for a place where he didn't have to pretend to be someone else to fit in. "Well, Leo," Jack said, handing him the coffee, "sanctuaries are expensive. They cost you your pride, your secrets, and occasionally, your ability to tell a straight story to a landlord. But the coffee is free." Janet watched from the doorway, smiling. "He's going to be a handful, isn't he, Jack?" "The best kind of handful, Janet. The kind that needs a little salt." Chapter 58. The Algorithmic Shadow. While Sophie was digging in Italy and Leo was learning in Santa Monica, a new threat was coalescing in Northern California. A tech billionaire named Silas Vane, a direct descendant of Sebastian Vane, had launched a new project called Veritas.ai. Vane's goal was to monetize the global thirst for truth. He wanted to use advanced biometrics and social data to create a trust score for every human being on the planet. He marketed it as the digital version of the mirror soup, but without the empathy or the humanity. "The Trippers were pioneers," Silas Vane said during a televised keynote, "but their truth is messy, it's emotional, it's inefficient. Veritas.ai will provide a truth that is objective, calculated, and perfectly architected for the digital age." Vane had already begun aggressively acquiring the patents Arthur Prynne had left behind, patents that Prynne had thought were buried forever. He wanted to turn the Honest City plans into a blueprint for a series of high-tech Veritas villages, gated communities, where your access to food and shelter was tied to your digital honesty. "He's turning our home into a prison," Sophie said, over a crackling satellite phone from Calabria. "We need to get back, Victor," she said. "The bitter root isn't just for soup anymore. We need to season the network." Chapter 59. The Digital Siege. The confrontation happened not on the boardwalk, but in the virtual space where Silas Vane felt most secure. Vane had organized a grand unveiling of the first Veritas village, and he had invited the Tripper family as guests of honor, a classic move to co-opt their legacy. But Sophie and Victor didn't come alone. They brought Leo, who had spent weeks mapping the vulnerabilities in the Honest City blueprints that Vane was using. And they brought Jack and Janet, who provided the one thing Vane could never compute, a shared history. During the live stream, as Vane demonstrated how his algorithm could detect a lie in milliseconds, Sophie stepped onto the stage. "Your algorithm detects the lie, Silas," Sophie said, her voice steady, "but it doesn't understand the reason. My father lied to his landlord to keep a roof over his head and his friends together. That lie built a family. Your truth, it only builds a spreadsheet." Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. It wasn't the salt. It was a concentrated extract of the bitter root. She didn't drop it into a soup. She dropped a single drop onto the biometric scanner on the podium. The reaction was a digital version of the Paris Opera House. The bitter root extract acted as a harmonic disruptor to Vane's sensors. The algorithm didn't crash. It began to show the truth of Silas Vane himself. The screens behind him began to flicker with Vane's own trust score, a deep, flashing red. The world saw the architecture of Vane's own deceptions, the stolen patents, the manipulated data, the cold, hollow core of his digital empire. The crowd went silent. Vane stared at the screens, his golden facade crumbling in real time. "The architecture of a lie can protect people," Leo shouted from the back. "But the architecture of a scam only protects the scanner." Chapter 60. The Living Foundation. A year after the fall of Silas Vane, the boardwalk was quiet again. The hype of Veritases had faded, replaced by a more quiet, local movement, Sophie and Victor had officially opened the Prin Tripper Institute of Architecture and Connection. Leo was their first graduate, and he was currently supervising the renovation of the Regal Beagle, turning it into a community center that maintained the old bar feel but with a shared library and a professional kitchen. Jack and Janet had officially retired, meaning they spent 8 hours a day at the restaurant and the other 16 worrying about the students. Cindy was now the head of the resilience department, teaching the community how to bounce through the inevitable tremors of life. One evening, the whole group gathered on the balcony of apartment 201. They were celebrating the completion of the first honest wing, a small extension of the building that used the clay of Calabria to ensure the walls were as flexible as the hearts within them. Jack stood up, his silver hair catching the last rays of the sun. "You know," Jack said, looking at Sophie, Victor, Leo, and his old friends, "I spent most of my life trying to keep people out of this apartment so they wouldn't see the truth. But now, I realized the truth was never the problem. It was the fear that the truth wasn't enough." He raised his glass. "To the roommates. The ones we had, the ones we have, and the ones who haven't knocked yet." As the Santa Monica moon rose, the building didn't glow. It didn't flash. It just stood there, solid, slightly crooked, and perfectly at home. The architecture of a lie was complete. The architecture of truth was evolving. But the architecture of love? That was a structure that required no blueprints, only the willingness to answer when someone knocks on the door. The End the Cowboy of Apartment 201, a novel of romance, deception, and shag carpeting. Prologue. The golden hour of Santa Monica. The Pacific Ocean was a bruised purple, reflecting a sun that refused to go down without a fight. In Santa Monica, the air smelled of salt, coconut-scented tanning oil, and the distant, greasy promise of burgers from the pier. It was 1979, an era defined by disco beats and the precarious balancing act of three young people sharing a two-bedroom apartment. Apartment 201 was more than just a living space. It was a sanctuary of pastel colors and wicker furniture. But tonight, the air inside was thick with more than just the humidity of a California evening. It was thick with Jack Tripper's frustration. Chapter 1. The Tongue-Tied Chef. Jack Tripper sat at the kitchen table, a dog-eared Spanish textbook spread before him like a battle map. He was a man of many talents. He could julienne a carrot in seconds and bake a soufflé that didn't collapse under the weight of a heavy sigh. Hoot, linguistics was his Achilles heel. "Me llamo Jack," he muttered, his voice a low rasp. "Dinner will be served at 8. La cena será a las 8. He was dreaming of a cruise ship. A friend had landed a gig cooking in the Caribbean simply because he could navigate a menu in Spanish. For Jack, stuck in the grind of culinary school and part-time shifts, the idea of the open sea and a kitchen that smelled of lime and cilantro was intoxicating. "Jack, are you still at it?" He looked up. Janet Wood stood in the doorway, her hair perfectly coiffed in that sensible yet stylish bob that always seemed to catch the light. Janet was the anchor of the trio, a florist with a heart of gold and a temper that only flared when the rent was late. "Mucho lousy, Janet," Jack sighed, dropping his head onto the book. "I'm trying to tell someone to bring me a bottle of red wine, and it sounds like I'm asking for a glass of goat's blood." "Why the sudden rush to be bilingual?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "Opportunities, Janet. The world is bigger than Santa Monica. I found out about this cruise ship job. If I can just master the basics, I'm gone. Sailing into the sunset with a whisk in my hand." Janet felt a strange, sharp pang in her chest. The idea of Jack leaving of the apartment without his clumsy charm and the smell of his experimental sauces felt wrong. "You'd leave us for a boat? It's a big boat," Jack joked, though his eyes lingered on hers a second too long. Their moment was broken by the sound of the front door swinging open. Cindy Snow entered with her usual chaotic energy. Cindy was a secretary with the grace of a newborn giraffe. She didn't just walk into a room, she collided with it. "¿Dónde está el museo?" Cindy chirped, dropping her purse. Jack blinked. "The museum? Why are you asking about the museum?" "I heard you studying." Cindy laughed. "I thought I'd help. But honestly, Jack, I wouldn't take my clothes off there either. What? Jack asked, confused. I don't know. It just sounded like a scandal. Before Jack could defend his honor, a sharp, rhythmic pounding echoed at the door. It wasn't the friendly knock of a neighbor. It was the frantic, neurotic beat of a man in crisis. Chapter 2. The Landlord's Paranoia. Ralph Furley was a man who dressed like a kaleidoscope had exploded in a polyester factory. Tonight, he was wearing a leisure suit the color of a bruised plum, topped with an ascot that defied the laws of fashion. Jack! Jack! You gotta help me! Furley burst in, his eyes darting around as if the walls had ears. Mr. Furley, calm down, Janet said, stepping forward. What's wrong? My brother Bart. He's a serpent, I tell you. A cold-blooded reptile in a three-piece suit. He wants to find a reason to fire me, to take over the management. Jack stood up, rubbing his temples. Mr. Furley, you're being paranoid again. Who's the spy? My niece, Veronica. She's staying the weekend while Bart's out of town. Ha! Out of town. My foot. She's here to snoop, to document my every move, to report back that I'm incompetent. She's your niece, Cindy pointed out gently. Maybe she just wanted to visit her favorite uncle? Unlikely, Furley hissed. Bart's tapped my phone before. He opened my mail. He even had a detective follow me to the bowling alley. Jack sighed. Okay, so what do you want from us? Furley stopped pacing and looked Jack up and down. His expression shifted from panic to a sort of desperate appraisal. I need a distraction. I need a young man to take her out, to keep her busy so she can't watch me. Someone popular, good-looking, fun. A real man's man. Jack straightened his posture, a small smirk playing on his lips. Well, Mr. Furley, I think I fit the bill. I like football. I drink beer. I'm not half bad at bowling. Furley let out a short, barking laugh. Jack, I don't mean you. I mean a guy who likes women.